My name is Dr. Meenal Viz, and I'm an NHS doctor. And during the first wave of COVID in 2020, I worked in emergency medicine in London whilst I was 6 months pregnant. And today I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story about greed. It's a story about a conservative peer who used her political connections to make millions of pounds out of useless PPE. And this was whilst nurses and doctors in the NHS struggled on the front line. Our story starts here at the House of Lords. And this is Baroness Michelle Mone of Mayfair. She's a lingerie entrepreneur and a conservative peer who was given a seat in the Lords by David Cameron. In May 2020, Mone sat down at a computer and wrote an email to Michael Gove, offering to source personal protective equipment. And at that point, Gove was a senior minister here at the Cabinet Office. And it appears that Gove suggested that Mone contact another minister, the Tory peer Theodore Agnew, who also worked here. Mone then emailed them both using their private email addresses. So this meant that the exchange could not be seen by the public using freedom of information laws. She told her fellow Conservative politicians that large quantities of PPE could be procured via her team in Hong Kong. The company Mone claimed could secure the supplies was called PPE MedPro, and as a result, Mone's offer was added to a secret VIP lane. And this was established by the Tories to fast-track often lucrative PPE business offers from well-placed figures. This included many with links to the ruling Conservative Party. At this point, PPE MedPro didn't even exist as a company. It was only incorporated 4 days after Mone had sent the emails. And by the end of June, the government had contracted to pay £203 million of public money to the company that Mone vouched for. And this was with an order for 210 million masks and 25 million surgical gowns. And by now, we'd witnessed the deaths of some of our colleagues and the impact the PPE shortage was having on families across the country. I remember being given one mask for an entire day. It just wasn't enough to keep doctors and patients safe. But what about those supplies from PPE MedPro? The ones Conservative peer Baroness Mone told Michael Gove could be procured via her team in Hong Kong. Well, the 25 million surgical gowns for which the government paid PPE MedPro £122 million were rejected by the Department of Health after a technical inspection, and they were never used in the NHS. The money and the chance to procure usable gowns for NHS staff like me and my colleagues was completely wasted. The MedPro gowns that the public paid for never made it to the hospital wards that people like me were working on. And by autumn 2020, while we struggled to keep the NHS on its feet, Mone had her own challenges. She was planning to marry the financier Douglas Barrowman at the Palace of Westminster. But COVID restrictions had forced her to cancel her wedding plans. Instead, she decided to switch the ceremony to the Isle of Man, where there were fewer COVID regulations in place. The island is a self-governing British Crown dependency situated in the Irish Sea, between Britain and Ireland. Its economy is bolstered by offshore banking and its status as a tax haven. The Isle of Man has no capital gains tax, wealth tax, stamp duty, or inheritance tax, and a top rate of income tax of 20%. Mone's fiancé Barrowman owned a sprawling U-shaped 9-bedroom home on the island. And here's what you need to know, because whilst the couple were making wedding arrangements from here, Barrowman seems to have also been focused on moving tens of millions of pounds around various Isle of Man registered trusts, companies, and accounts. Now, at the time, journalists had started asking awkward questions about PPE MedPro and that huge government contract. But Mone claimed she had no role in the process. Mone's lawyers repeatedly rejected that she was connected in any way to the business. While a lawyer instructed by her husband, Douglas Barrowman, said, "Mr. Barrowman is not an investor, director, or shareholder in PPE MedPro." And Mone claimed through her lawyers that she did not benefit financially from that contract, transferring £203 million of public money to PPE MedPro. To this day, she and her husband Douglas Barrowman continue to deny any wrongdoing. But here's what we now know. Mone and Barrowman were involved in the PPE MedPro business. A leaked report from HSBC Bank indicates that Barrowman invested millions of pounds in the company. And crucially, that leaked HSBC probe has found that £65 million in profits from PPE MedPro were transferred to an entity called the Warren Trust, registered here on the Isle of Man, whose beneficial owner was Mone's then fiancé, Douglas Barrowman. £46 million of that £65 million was transferred to Barrowman's personal account. And the sum of £29 million was then transferred from there to the Kerristal Trust, registered in this building, again on the Isle of Man, whose beneficiaries were Baroness Michelle Mone of Mayfair and her grown-up children. In other words, leaked documents indicate that around the time of a wedding, Baroness Mone and her children secretly received £29 million originating from the profits of the PPE business that she'd pitched to her fellow Conservative parliamentarians Michael Gove and Lord Agnew. Money made in large part from a deal for surgical gowns that turned out to be useless. £29 million. Government has refused to tell us everything it knows about this affair. We only know what we know because reporters like David Conn of the Guardian newspaper and the Good Law Project have done so much to break open the story. The UK death toll hit 100,000 in January 2021, and by the summer Britain was enduring a third wave of COVID infections. Baroness Mone found time to post a photograph on Instagram of herself and her husband Douglas Barrowman in the Mediterranean. They were on board their new luxury yacht, the Lady M. Mone had then posted a series of pictures of herself, including ones of her posing on the deck of the Lady M, and accompanied them with reflections on how she'd attained a state of contentment. "Decide what makes you happy," she wrote in one post, "and just go for it."